Good evening. I'm Megan Barnard, the Ransom Center's Associate Director for Administration and Curatorial Affairs, and I'm delighted to welcome you here. Today we have the special privilege to hear from a remarkable writer who's also a member of the Ransom Center family. Julia Alvarez will be reading from her newest novel, The Cemetery of Untold Stories. Julia Alvarez writes poignantly about topics that are central to our culture and our lives, from immigration and bicultural identity to the complicated and deeply important nature of family relationships. She was born in New York City, but was raised in the Dominican Republic until she was 10, when her family was forced to flee the country because of the dangers of Rafael Trujillo's dictatorship. She once said of her return to the U.S., quote, "I think of myself at 10 years old, newly arrived in this country, feeling out of place, feeling that I would never belong." She went on to say, "I found myself turning more and more to writing as the one place where I could make sense of myself, my life, all that was happening to me." Her unique experiences have shaped and infused her writing, from such award-winning novels as How the García Girls Lost Their Accents and In the Time of the Butterflies to her most recent works. Among a very long list of honors, she has received an F. Scott Fitzgerald Award for Outstanding Achievement in American Literature, a Vermont Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts, and the National Medal of Arts awarded to her by President Obama in recognition of her extraordinary storytelling. In 2013, her extensive archive joined the Ransom Center's collections. It fills more than 230 boxes in this building, and these manuscripts, drafts, notes, letters, and other records of her remarkable career and life are consulted frequently in our reading room and in our classrooms by students and teachers and researchers. In Julia's newest book, a novelist named Alma Cruz tries to lay to rest her unfinished writings by burning boxes of manuscripts and burying their ashes, along with several manuscripts that refuse to burn, in a special cemetery she creates after returning to the Dominican Republic. Throughout the novel, many of Alma's untold stories refuse to rest. They resurface and persist and call out to others. I can think of no more fitting place for Julia to read from this novel than here in the Ransom Center, a building filled with manuscripts, including many unfinished stories that are preserved among our shelves and made accessible for study. Like the untold stories of this novel, the unfinished manuscripts preserved at the Ransom Center have a rich afterlife, awakening the imaginations of those who read them, inspiring and changing the students, researchers, and future generations of readers who encounter them. Our program this evening will begin with a brief reading from Julia, and then Julia will be joined in conversation by Dr. Laura Gutiérrez. Dr. Gutiérrez is Associate Professor in Latinx Studies here at UT Austin, and also serves as Associate Dean for Community Engagement and Public Practice in the College of Fine Arts. Her research centers on Latinx and Mexican performance, visual culture, queer studies, and feminisms. She received the MLA Prize for her book Performing Mexicanidad, Vendidas y Cabareteras on the Transnational Stage, and she has been honored as a UT Provost Authors Fellow and a Scholars Fellow at the Getty Research Institute. She also serves as co-artistic director of the Outsider Festival here in Austin. After their conversation, Julia has kindly agreed to take questions from the audience. Following the program, we hope you'll join us for a reception in our lobby where signed copies of The Cemetery of Untold Stories will be available for sale. Our galleries will be open during the reception, and we invite you to visit our two current exhibitions, Public Works, Art by Elizabeth Olds, and Hill and Adamson, the Clarkson Stanfield album. I'd like to thank Julia and Laura for joining us for this program today, as well as my colleagues at the Ransom Center who've made this event possible. And now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming Julia Alvarez and Laura Gutiérrez.
Hi, welcome
Yes,
everyone. So glad to
Thank
see so
you
many
for
friendly
coming.
faces. Yeah. So we're gonna start off with Julia Alvarez, our special guest here, who's going to do reading from her latest novel, and then we'll have a short conversation, and then we'll turn it over to you all for some questions.
Well, first of all, thank you, all of you, for showing up um, to celebrate the Ransom Center and the new novel, The Cemetery of Untold Stories. And special thanks to Megan Barnard and Erica Nunn Kinias, and I've already forgotten the right way to pronounce that. They've been wonderful welcomers, and Steve Annis, who is the director, right, of the Ransom Center, and who is given me a remote welcome, not meaning remotely, but warm welcome from London, because he couldn't be here. And of course to Laura, Gutiérrez, who has agreed to have a conversation about the book. And we thought I'd start with a little reading from it. And since many of you probably have not read the novel yet, giving you a little bit of context, so when I take you into this passage that I'm going to read, you have a little bit of a sense of how it works. So part one of the novel, we're introduced to Alma, who is an older writer who goes by the pen name of Scheherazade from the Arabian Nights, the great storyteller, one of my muses anyhow. And she has to take a pen name for reasons you find out about in the first part, and I won't go into. But after a lifetime in her craft, Alma Scheherazade has run out of creative juice. Her duende is in decline. And so she decides the time has come to bring her writing life to a close. So when she inherits a plot of abandoned farmland, a plot of abandoned land next to the town dump in a poor barrio in her homeland of the Dominican Republic, she decides to take all her failed manuscripts, her rough drafts, her never fully realized characters, and lay them to rest there at a place that she calls the Cemetery of Untold Stories. So in part two, which I'm going to be reading from, we shift point of view. We're in the barrio, and when a construction is going on in a neighborhood in the DR, all the people who live around, they're curious, what are they doing? What's going to come? What are they building? So you get to know the barrio and their ideas of what's going on here. And so the part that I'm going to read is the first person that gains entry into the cemetery. Her name is Filomena, and you're going to learn a little bit about her. And so after the construction is over, a sign goes up on the wall at the main gate, Cementerio de Cuentos Nunca Contados, a cemetery for untold stories. The only way to enter is to speak into a small black box at the front gate. Cuéntame, a woman's soft voice requests. Tell me a story. Only then does the door open or not. So the first visitor. The first to gain entry once the construction is done is Filomena. She lives alone in the tidy pink casita with a turquoise trim across the street from the back of the property. During the week, the house is closed up, as she is a sleep-in caretaker for an old woman in a nice recinto in the capital. Filomena, una alma de Dios, she is una alma de Dios who cleans the church on her days off, is none too bright, or so it is said, as she seldom speaks. She is never married and is now on the achy side of middle age. She still maintains the slender figure of a girl, so that she often gets whistles and catcalls from strangers until she turns around and the hecklers are surprised by the lined, seasoned face. As far as anyone knows, and the barrio prides itself on knowing everybody's business, Filomena has no living relatives, no former husband or lover who left her for another woman, no kids gone to El Norte for opportunities. It happens with women. They close down before they ever open up. Some flowers never bloom, or bloom too soon, or late in life. Only God knows why. Padre Brejino has delivered several sermons on this observation. Saturday afternoon, heading home from her day off, Filomena stops at the front gate. She doesn't know what comes over her. She looks left, right, then presses the button. A woman's voice asks for a story. Filomena is used to obeying orders. My name is Filomena, she begins. Soy católica. I dress the saints at church. I take care of a viejita in the capital. I have a sister Perla in Nueva York. Tesoro, her husband, is a good-for-nothing sinvergüenza. Also, I have 2 nephews, Pepito and Jorge. Filomena has run out of things to say. The gate remains locked. Obviously, what she has reported is not a story. She squeezes her eyes shut as if she could wring one out of her head. From the mango tree just outside the gate, she hears a bird singing. A little bird told me, the old people in the campo say before sharing a juicy piece of gossip that lures even the most indifferent to listen. Maybe that's what the voice box means by a story, something more like a chisme. Filomena recalls the story she told Perla years ago on the eve of her sister's departure with Tesoro for Nueva York. The story caused a rupture between the 2 sisters. Perla accused Filomena of jealousy. Her little sister was just wanting to hold on at all costs, thereby soiling Perla's chances at a better life. Don't ever talk to me again, Perla shouted. That was 30 years ago. The 2 sisters have not spoken since. Perla's words sealed Filomena's mouth shut. Except for her confessions to the priest and necessary phrases and quiet replies at work and in the daily commerce of life, Filomena has nothing to say. Did the rats eat your tongue? The locals tease her. But now, standing in front of the gate, the rats return her tongue with interest. For the second time, she tells her story, an outpouring into the little box. Colorín colorado, este cuento se ha acabado, she closes with the incantation. Es verdad, she adds, as she doesn't want to be accused again of lying. Lo and behold, the gates swing open. Once inside, Filomena runs into the woman everyone calls La Doña, who greets her warmly and compliments her on her story. Filomena feels emboldened to inquire. She has heard that the cemetery is not for people. That is so. Hasn't Filomena read the sign? Filomena is reluctant to admit her ignorance. Once people know, they dismiss her as someone not worth their while, or worse, they pity her. The daughters of her viejita have caught on, but instead of firing her, they color code all their mother's medications. Give Mama a pill from the bottle with the blue mark and a spoonful of the jarabe with a red mark for breakfast. For her lunch, the yellow tablet, and on it goes, a rainbow of cures throughout the day and night. Filomena gestures at the sculptures of birds, butterflies, a fish with a belly full of letters, bypassing the question of what is written on the sign. Is it a camposanto for animals? It's a cemetery for stories, the woman replies. Con su permiso, how does one bury a story? If a story is never told, where does it go? The woman answers with a question. The story she told her sister, where has it gone all these years of her silence? It's a question Filomena has never asked herself before. She exits the cemetery with the shiny eyes and ethereal smile of the santos she dresses in the church. A few neighbors have gathered outside the gate. Rumor has spread that Filomena, of all people, has gained entry. Did you talk to La Doña? Did she say who is to be buried there? What do the tombs say? Her neighbors pepper her with questions. Filomena is not about to admit to them either that she can't read. All she will say is that there are boxes everywhere, filled as far as she can tell with papers. She does not confess, lest her neighbors think her possessed, that as she strolled the pebbled walks, she was accosted at every turn by voices, young, old, rich, poor, male, female, telling tales. So that's the first visitor.
Truly, truly a wonderful novel. And it's also a wonderful lesson for those of us who are writers, those of us who tell stories, and people like me who live through and believe in the power of the imagination. So thank you for this gift, this offering that you have bestowed on us. If you haven't had a chance to read this novel, I encourage you to do so. For me, you know, there are so many reasons why I think this novel is wonderful, and we'll get to some of them, but I'll just sort of start to say a few things. It was a reminder for me, and I did not know that I needed this reminder, by the way, that we are always surrounded by stories. We all carry these stories with or within us, and we must let them flow, and we must let them flow. I'm quoting from the novel itself, or else, you know, these stories don't go through us. They paralyze, they burden us, they drown us, right, if we don't let them flow. So thank you for this reminder. There's always, another additional reminder is that there's always somebody who's going to listen to us, to listen to these stories. So that was another really beautiful reminder. What I love is that Alma finds co-conspirators or collaborators, and these are my terms, for Brava, who is her friend, who's a sculptor, who makes the markers for the graves. And then Filomena, who we just met through what you read, and Filomena eventually becomes the groundskeeper. La Doña or Alma or Cheresade hires Filomena to take care of the cemetery. But we also learned that Filomena, who's been quiet for 30 years, who has not been able to speak or even tell this story, this has been the second time that she's told this story. We also learned that she is an amazing listener. She is a deep listener and a deep feeler. And I have to say that Filomena is my favorite character in the novel. We almost never hear her own stories, but she is always listening through the touching or the sort of caressing the markers of the different graves. And I wanted to sort of like think about one moment when she is listening to Bienvenida's story later on in this novel, where she, and by the way, Bienvenida Inocencia is based on a historical character, Trujillo's second wife, who is one of the characters that Alma or Sherazade is writing about, one of these failed stories that eventually gets buried. So, but Bienvenida's story comes to life through, this process, this ritual, where, she's buried and then, comes to life. And Filomena is the lucky one that hears Bienvenida's story. And here's a part where we're from the point of view of Bienvenida, and Bienvenida says, Filomena wipes her face with her hand, momentarily forgetting her story to fall inside mine. So here's when we are inside Bienvenida's story. And the reason I wanted to get us to this moment is that, again, I forgot my stories because I fell or kept falling into the different stories that you tell in this novel. And I was just blown away by the way that you did this. And my question is very simple. My first question, how did you come up with this? Yeah.
Well, thank you for highlighting Filomena. I'm not allowed to play favorites. A writer has to love her characters to life. But Filomena is a really engaged listener. I mean, she listens to a story totally immersed in it and pulling it in and making sense of her own life with it. And that, to me, is my favorite reader. My favorite listener is someone that there's a hunger in them, and the story is feeding that hunger, nourishing that hunger. And so Filomena is, I think, would be any storyteller's ideal person. And we do learn her story, the story that she's only told twice. Well, the third time, you're going to find out about it later. But where did it come from? You know, I come from a Dominican culture, a culture immersed in ritual and santeria, and I've always had this, I have rituals for beginning a book and rituals for closure, because the characters don't, once you're done with a book, they want to stay in there and they need to move along so you can get the new ones in, but you have to exorcise them, right? And so I have rituals. So for instance, in The Time of the Butterflies, when I finished that, I took my last version of the manuscript. Sorry, it's not here, Megan. I took it to the Museo de las Hermanas Mirabal, where they've created a museum out of the house they lived in, and I buried it in the yard. I didn't ask permission because I finally told Minu, one of the daughter, Minerva's daughter, Minerva, under the laurel tree. If anybody digs it up, she said by now it's kind of disappeared. But so I have had rituals, you know, and so the idea of having to bury something is part of me. But also it has to do with being an older writer, like my Alma. You know, when I was a younger writer, I have boxes and boxes of drafts, research, manuscripts that were supposed to be a novel, etc. And I would store them away, and I would think, someday I'm going to write you down. So leave me alone. Your turn is coming. By the time you get to be my age, you realize that's not going to happen. So how do you lay them to rest? And so that's a long answer for how the idea of un cementerio, to put each of those manuscripts to rest in the country that many of those characters came from.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm struck also by the power of oral stories, the oral oral storytelling that you're activating here in a way that is in conversation with other forms of communication. You know, I was also struck by the sculptures, the artistic. You know, I mean, the cemetery is not just a place where these stories are buried. It becomes a very active space. It becomes a gallery for Brava to also show her work. Right? So there's a very rich conversation happening here between, literature, but also with art, and then also with the oral form of storytelling. And I wanted to, I had this, like, as I read, I kept thinking of a friend of mine who is an artist, an interdisciplinary visual performance artist, who is also at a point in her life where she's thinking about, death, because of her age. And she bought a plot of land, a cemetery plot in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. And, eventually it would be used for her to be buried in. But at this moment, it's a gallery. It's called the Graveyard Gallery. And it's a small piece of land, but she's using it in the meantime to exhibit her art or the art of others. Her name is, she's a Chicana artist named Nao Bustamante, for those of you that are curious and want to do this. But I kept thinking about, the ways in which these spaces where we wander, where souls, and we'll come back to the word soul in a bit, but where, there's a lot of things happening that we don't necessarily see, but then there's things that we do see, through these visual. I wanted to ask you about if you had any thoughts about these different modes of communication, storytelling, oral storytelling, and art within literature.
Well, I think coming from the Dominican Republic during the dictatorship, long dictatorship of Trujillo, things weren't written down because they could get you in trouble, for one thing. And it was an oral culture, a storytelling culture. And so I always, when I came to the first world, quote unquote, and I was in an MFA program and people would talk about what they had been reading as a child and writing and so forth, I always felt like an imposter because I didn't have that tradition at all. And then as I was learning about storytelling and characters and humor and pacing in a story, I realized that I knew all of that stuff, and I'd learned it in childhood from people who didn't even know how to read or write, but they had those skills. And so I realized that that's the privileging of only a certain kind of art, a canonization of only those forms of art leaves this rich root system that stories, even the written high-flown literature, comes from. I'm going to mess it up, but there's a wonderful haiku by Basho, and it's something like, the origin of all art is the farmer's busy hum planting his rice fields.
Oh, beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful? I didn't get all the syllables right, but you get it. And that I recognize this in myself, that my root system comes, this is what feeds my stories. This is what feeds my stories. And so the book is also dedicated to Anonymous, because some of the muses never get their names on the covers of book, never get this kind of attention, but they are the, they are the origin of so many of my stories. And also, Brava, who is the sculptor, she has a more embodied way, instead of abstract, of honoring the stories by creating these sculptures, that she creates a sculpture for each dead, untold story, and that honors it and channels it, because the statues themselves begin to weep and do all kinds of things, and voices come through them. So I think it's a way to understand that we who are artists, and you know what, all of us are artists, all of us are storytellers. As you said, we're all walking around with stories, We don't do honey. We don't make like bees. We don't do silk like worms. We are the critter that tells stories. So it's a way to honor all these different generative ways that we weave narrative. And so, yeah, I don't know that answers the question, but, and many times, you know, when I'm working on a story, I wish I were an artist, but I'll find pictures or paintings or photographs because it's incarnated, you know, and it just, it's, I get the energy, but all of us who are artists, that's what I was going to say, all of us, we're dealing with a mysterious power here, this mystery, this, you know, energy. We're trying to put into words or into shapes things that can't be put into words or into shapes. And somehow, though, with art, we're able to transcend that inchoate quality of experience. And so I think it's, you know, in a way, the Cemetery of Untold Stories is a great, deep, profound bow of gratitude to where so many of our stories that don't get celebrated, recognized, published, come from.
Yeah, that's great. This just leads me to my next question, which has to do with Alma and Alma's name, which, you know, Alma Cruz or soul cross. But Alma specifically, soul is, you know, in the etymology, I had, you know, I couldn't help but to think of the etymology in Latin for alma, which is anima, right? And then also as a recovering Catholic, I couldn't help to think of the anima sola, right? Who is in, you know, this image of the woman in flames that's in purgatory.
Yeah.
Like, you know, is not having a place to rest yet, right? Anyway, so I thought about that, but of course, you know, there's these stories who are, you know, and or alma actually, you know, soul also, the word also functions in English, the sort of just spiritual or immaterial part of a human, you know, what cannot die or cannot be, you know, put to rest, what lives on. We were talking about the energy that lives on, right? And then also the word animate, right? Or the ways in which the sculptures are also animate. You know, they cry, they tell stories. And so I wanted to ask you if, you know, this is, you know, kind of like maybe too on the nose, obviously the name Alma, but if you can talk more about, you know, the Alma as a name, is intentionally used for what, you know, she symbolizes in the novel.
Wow, you've given me so many ideas that I would love to claim when I created her, but it's right. You know, we say in Spanish, anímate, anímate, energize yourself, anímate. But I thought she has a pen name though, so that name isn't there. But behind the stories is the animus. You know, the soul and the energy, which she feels declining. And in fact, as you read the novel, Alma really becomes more and more, begins to disappear. And the stories are what lives and take over. And so, in a sense, I think that's the fate of any of us who, you know, what lives on, what do we leave behind? And it's these characters and these stories that will live on, and they're not necessarily written down. You know, sometimes our legacy isn't visible, but it's carried in someone who maybe does something because of what's put in them. So Alma is really disappearing because her alma is really in these stories, and so appropriately they become the center of the novel. But I had another thought about Alma, and but it was, you know, sometimes when you're writing as a writer, you go through a list of names, and somehow it doesn't feel right. It's like wearing somebody else's clothes. They don't hang right, they don't maybe smell like you. And the character keeps saying, no, 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 no. So Alma, I don't know at what iteration she became Alma, but when she did, I knew that's the name for her, Alma. So, and you know, I don't work a lot of this stuff out intellectually. I'm a messy writer. I go through many drafts and I take a lot of wrong turns, but I need sort of to get into the flow of the narrative and let it, it's a strange combination of letting it, of trying to shape it and control it, probably like a sculptor, and then let it shaping me and saying which way it goes. So Alma's just seemed like at this stage of this writer's life, where she is heading towards Alma, just being an Alma, it seemed like the right name. Yeah.
And Alma has 3 sisters, Consuelo, Piedad,
Amparo, Consuelo, and Piedad. Because we give these allegorical names to. It's a big burden to be called, you know, Consuelo or Amparo.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
And they're there, you know, not as they're present at the beginning and almost towards the end when they, you know, they come to
do an intervention.
To do an intervention because they're like,
worried
what is our
about-
sister doing?
I know, se está volviendo loca. Ay, ¿qué es esto? Yeah.
Like a cemetery for people, not
Yeah,
but there are no
no,
people.
no.
And
No.
so they come do an intervention. But I wanted to, and this is just out of curiosity, I was thinking about your first novel, you know, how the García girls lost their accent, and thinking about, you know, how that's a coming of age novel. And here we have 4 sisters who are, you know, in their 60s, perhaps early 70s, right? Who are, you know, at another stage in their life, the outer or outing moment of life. And I don't know, there seems to be this kind of, I don't know, I don't want to call it a bookend, but like a
Yeah,
sort
it
of a
is.
circular, okay.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that? Or?
Well, you know, it's, I was interested, as I grow older, I'm interested in this landscape I'm entering. And one of the reasons I write is where there's a silence or a gap, and I'm needing those books because I'm wondering what is this all about? And I was so tired of the ageism in a lot of fiction. You know, the abuelita, she's always doing, I mean, she's a flat character, cooking or whatever, or the old man in a Victorian novel dies on the first page and leaves a will that the rest of this, you know, but I thought, what about the nuance? What is it like? And I wanted to know more. I mean, viscerally, what is it to, you know, to grow old? And in this case, to grow old in a craft you spent your lifetime practicing. What is that? You know, Edward Said has calls it the late style. What is the late style? But what is the late style? Well, his study is mostly all men. What is it for a woman? And what is it for a transnational woman whose stories came from somewhere else? You know, what is that process of growing old? And so I write not because I have answers, but because I'm curious and I want to find things out. So that's where, you know, the idea of an older protagonist comes from. And I read this critic, Constance Rock. After I was done with the novel, I thought, you know, that this was some original thing that I had thought, pero nada under the sun, etc., is new. And I found out that she had coined a term in the 1990s. She's a Canadian critic, Constance Rock, and she calls it the Volendungsroman. And it's the bookend of the Bildungsroman, which is the novel of growing up, the portrait of the artist as a young man. And so the Wollendorfsroman is the novel of completion, of aging. And I wanted the portrait of the artist as an old woman. So what is that process like? You know, that stage of life. But it was, you said the perfect word, my trigger word. It's a bookend. No, seriously, it's the bookend.
Okay.
And so I was really interested. And I researched by reading books that I admire that have done that. And there are wonderful books, from A Simple Heart by Flaubert. There's Reading Turgenev by William Trevor. There's Our Souls at Night by Kent Haruf. There's some wonderful novels that are very nuanced and complex characters, not just the sweet abuelita or the cranky old part that's giving away his money to all the wrong people and causing trouble. No, I wanted to find out about that guy and about the abuelita. Bring her out and let her talk.
And when the sisters are together,
Oh, yeah, the
it's
sisters.
a riot. It's a riot. I felt it resonated so much with me and my sisters, and yeah, there's like
The rivalry and the
Yeah.
love and the But also, like I said, these things all share a root system. I mean, it's my Greek chorus. In plays, the Greek chorus, they caution, they have opinions, they march out and want to take over. And my Greek chorus are the sisters. They come in and they have their own agendas and reactions. And, for me, that we is an important component of storytelling. Not just the me writer, but the we that surrounds the writer.
Yeah. I think I'm going to ask you one last question, just because I can't help myself, but and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. But just thinking about the premise of the novel, the ways in which these papers have been interred in this cemetery in the Dominican Republic. And then we are here at the Harry Ransom Center, where
Thank you, yes.
your archive is now res, your papers now res.
This is my cemetery.
Okay.
Of all told, untold, and
So
all
y-
the
yeah.
seriously.
So yeah, basically you I don't know, you anticipated my question about precisely how you feel about, we were lucky, and I was lucky enough to tag along when we went downstairs to where your papers are that Megan took us. And, just sort of like thinking about how, the Mirabal sisters are going to, sort of come, even though now you just said that
Just one manuscript.
Just one manuscript is.
It wasn't the interesting one. It was just a final draft, not the messy one.
But then, the Mirabal sisters, and then the García sisters, I was like, should I stop and listen like Filomena to,
Yeah.
I kept, sort of wanting to be Filomena and listen to anyway. And I'm also thinking about Pepito, right? So Pepito is Filomena's nephew, who's become a professor of Latinx literature. And I was just like, also, the ways in which Pepito is a researcher and is studying, Alma or Cherezade's work. Anyway, just thinking about how you feel about the ways in which these papers here at the Harry Ransom will be activated or will be used by people like Pepito or other
thank you.
researchers.
I would hope so. I would hope so, because I didn't think about it, that it is a corollary, Cemetery of Untold Stories, till we were headed here, and I thought, oh my goodness, it's like, I already have a cemetery for all my stuff, but that it's wonderful. I mean, what an honor for a writer to have a place that actually wants to. I didn't have to construct it, because that is the legacy. That and the readers who take it in, and then out of maybe reading a story or a novel of mine are inspired to create their own, because it's all about transmission, you know, being a bead in the necklace of the generations. You know, I love that feeling. It's so much less lonely than being the star, you know, where it's just about me and being a celebrity. I like the idea. That's why I like that Laura was willing to come up here with me, because it's too scary by you. I'm a middle child. I feel safe when I'm surrounded by two people telling me that I'm wrong. But you tell me, you tell me that I'm right. So there you go.
Exactly.
Yes.
I tell you, you're right. And I'm sure, you know, the wonderful people here in the audience will also share that with me, tell you that you're right. And I'm sure a few of you have a question. So I think this is a good moment. Can you take a couple of questions?
And you don't, if you haven't read the novel or want to talk about the novel, I really, as I used to say to my classes, curiosity is holy. So you can ask me whatever you want about the writing process, about whatever. Oh, there's one. Oh, and there's one here too. Oh, good.
Oh, Patricia.
So I'm Patricia García. I'm in the English department here. I teach a class on your work and Southwest Network's work. And we work with your archives, and I've been working with your archives and your letters. Your letters to Sandra, her letters to you, these sort of conversations. So.
Oh, wow. What happened, Doug?
So at the beginning of the book, Alma's writer friend, who has a story that she can't get out.
Okay, story, yeah.
And I was thinking about, you know, the sisters are one community, the community that Alma has in her cemetery, her friends, but Alma's relationship with other writers and your relationship with other writers. How has that been a community for you? And I think I have two sisters, they're lawyers. They don't always understand.
Lo siento. They're good at arguing. That's the
thing. You know, when our father was sick and I stepped out of the room and I came back in, they elected me to be the one to talk to the doctors.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
It's like, y'all are the lawyers. I said, yeah, but you're the teacher. So, but they don't always understand what I'm doing. And I imagine as a creative writer, having communities of other creative writers is so helpful important to you. So how has that been a part of your writing life?
Oh, you know, when Sandra and Ana Castillo, Denise Chavez, when we were all coming up, we were, there was no such thing as Latinx literature, multicultural studies. I mean, we got punished when we landed in Nueva York in 1960, 10-year-old, for speaking Spanish. So that was not encouraged. So having each other, finding each other, we were our compañeras. We really supported each other. It was so important because, you know, you felt like you were, you know, going crazy, one rejection after another. They thought we were sociology, that, you know, that we didn't belong on the shelves of American literature. And, you know, having a friend, a sassy, brave, courageous friend like Sandra say, forget that, who needs them, you know. It just was very, very important to find these other, and they had found each other because as Chicana writers, I don't know if they were calling themselves that, they had a small regional community. But I was, you know, in Vermont, or I was in Massachusetts, as Papi couldn't even pronounce it. I mean, I was not part of a community. So finding their work first and then connecting with them was really huge for me because I didn't have that community. The Dominicans in Washington Heights, all of that came after the dictatorship, later. But we were there and it was very isolated. So I would try to write stories, say, in college, and I would have and Tía Clara, and it would be circle, and they would say, you know, this is for English-speaking audience, and it would be Aunt Claire. And if you call Tía Clara Aunt Claire, she leaves the story. I mean, You know, it's not, so having each other say yes, yes, yes. And Sandra especially, at a critical time in my writing life after García Girls came out and The Sky Fell on Me from La Familia, she just said, don't let them silence you. She was, I might have ended up like Filomena. So that was an important connection for me, having each other. And then, of course, suddenly we all ended up with Susan Burkholz as our agent, and she's a small, feisty woman. And I just learned, I thought it was only 13 times that how the García Girls how the García Girls lost her accents, got rejected. I thought it was only 13 times. And she told me, no, it was over 20. And she stopped telling me after 13. But so you have all these naysayers, and then there's this little chorus, you know, Ava Sandra, Ava Denise, Ava Norma Alarcón, Ava Jerry Moraga saying, no, 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 you know, these are our stories, and giving you ánimo, yeah. And it's hard because you have enough voices around you telling you that it doesn't belong, and it's hard. We're, as writers, artists, we're porous, and it's hard for it not to come in and make you feel that, you know, it's not going to happen. You will never find your listeners, your readers. So yes, very important.
Hello. Oh my gosh. It's such a thrill to be speaking with you. I have admired your work for so long. Oh, by the way, I'm Sonia Montoya. I'm a colleague of Laura's at the College of
your
Fine
friends,
Arts.
thank you for bringing them.
Yes, yes. And I'm really, you may have seen me like typing on my phone at some point, and I was trying to take notes on what you were saying.
I think they've taped it, right?
Oh, they did?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes,
oh, fantastic.
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. So you mentioned that you go through like you're a messy writer, that you go through a lot of drafts, that you take wrong turns, and yet when I read your work, it just seems like perfection. And I'm wondering,
that's generous. Yes.
And I mean, it speaks to me. I feel like I'm listening to true voices. Anyway. Could you say a little bit about your process and how you keep going, sort of like the different elements that feed your work? You talked a little bit about research, about community, but what gets you back on the right path after you take a wrong turn? Thank you.
Oh, because I can't give it up. You know, it's what's, I think we all have something that is in us to do on this earth, or many things to do. I'm more of a monoculture, so I feel like the storytelling is how I breathe. You know, people would say, well, when are you going to retire, like from storytelling? Well, maybe that triggered thinking about Alma, but it's something I do, even if it doesn't get published. I would always want a listener or a reader, because the story is only half done until someone takes it in and animates it. There you go, giving it ánimo, giving it soul. So I would always need that, but I can't, it's a practice. You know, after a certain point, if you meditate, if you're a dancer, if you art, it's something that if of any given day, if I had to choose, I might not choose it because there's this to do and this to do and this to do. But it becomes a practice. It's not a choice. It's a practice. And so you do it every day. And the days you don't do it, like the days that I don't meditate, I can feel it and people around me can feel it. Bill is there to verify that. So it's something that it's the way I process this baffling experience of being alive. So I do it every day. I have my little rituals, my little bowl of clean water, and you know, it probably doesn't do anything, but it does something in here, and it's preparation, ritualizing the process. And I always like to start the day with poetry. reading it, because I feel like it's the little note that the choir master blows to get everybody at the same level. And when I read poetry, it's just my first love, and it's also stirs in me the mystery that something, that language can be used in this charmed way. And so the rest of my writing day is trying to get to that level. And many drafts, and when I was younger, I can't run this fast anymore, but I used to say that my writing process was staying one sentence ahead of the Furies, the naysayers. So all I had to do was one sentence more than, oh, this is terrible. You know, all the things in your head that stop you. Just one sentence, because sometimes you can't silence them. So to keep going. And there's days where I just throw most of what I write away, if not all of it. But my job is to do the work so that when you get it, you can't tell which page was the bad page, the bad day page, and the good day page. And then, of course, revision, which is relentless for me. Even when I give a reading, I say, oh, no. Why did I leave this, in there? So it's a constant, because this is stopping the flow, but the flow goes on. And so this is the stopped flow, and now I would change things. And I think I can make out that Liliana Valenzuela, one of my translators, is here. And she can tell you that even with translations, I drive my translators crazy because they will translate and I will go, no, but I'm not truly bilingual in that I wasn't encouraged. So my language, dominant language, is English, but I can tell orally when it doesn't sound right, but I can't tell Liliana how to fix it or what's wrong with it. No. And part of it is that, there isn't such a thing as standard Spanish, which I was told at first. We need a translator that will translate into standard Spanish. How big an insult is that? Yeah. We have our little languages. Yeah. So we say things a little different in Dominican Spanish from even Puerto Rico or Cuba or Mexico. So all of that, is what I don't know how to do in translation. I couldn't translate my own work. So it's a messy process of working it. And finally, a good editor, my first reader is my agent, Stuart now. And, he's a good way to have you re-envision, because they're reading it the way you have to learn to read it as a reviser. I would tell my students to revise a work, read it as if read your own piece as if someone else had written it. But you need a little distance sometime to be able to hear that, and an editor helps you after those first drafts to hear it as you, the reader, are going to receive it. And sometimes you need that infrastructure that can be pulled away once the thing can stand on its own two legs. But you needed it, but the reader doesn't need it.
One more question, perhaps?
Oh, yeah. There's one right here and another one. Two people. How about the question in La Ñapa? You know what La Ñapa? Do you have ñapas?
No.
Oh, see, Dominican. La Ñapa is what you get after it's all done as a little extra at the end. So if you go to the market.
Pilón,
el pilón. You say, you buy a dozen,
yeah,
and you say, y la ñapa,
okay.
y la ñapa. Yeah.
So one more question.
Un pilón, or two, and then the ñapa.
And then
Who wants to be the latter? I can be the pilón if you want. It's an honor to be here with you. Let me get my thoughts in place. I'm also a writer. I write poetry. I'm not a very good storyteller, but I do feel a lot. So I feel like writing, it's also the way I process. Si no, el alma se me va al cuello.
Si no, el alma, ¿qué?
Se me va al cuello.
Al cuello? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Threatening to leave your body.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just too much sometimes. But this is more than a question, I think gratitude, because we have a book club that it's only women, and we all live here. We're all from Latin America. So we live in this duality of like, you're not from there anymore, but you're still from that place, and we live here. So it's hard to get sometimes books that are written in Spanish or that are from other authors from Latin America. So anyways, we only read women writers right now. And we are in our mid-30s, kind of like exploring this age of taking away our, the stigmas that society has put on us, coming from Latin America, the machismo. And we read En el tiempo de las mariposas in December, and this month we're reading El cementerio de los cuentos. Pero I've noticed that with the Mirabal sisters, and in these, I'm only in chapter 2, I must confess, but I see that you talk about these women who are so powerful, so strong, but also about their struggles of being a woman and what we encounter in society, being a mother, not having the support of the husband, or you do mention the characters of men, but I don't know, you do it in a way that it's not just a trauma, it's also the story of the woman and the strengths of the women. Like here in Alma as well, when you mention about the guy with the hand tattoos and that he planted the beautiful sunflowers in the backyard, and that the friend was like, well, you better marry this one. And we get that a lot as women, right? What about our strengths, and what about that guy not losing you? And I don't know, I really like, this is more of like a compliment of like how, as we encounter these stories that are, struggles of women that can be just about the trauma, just about the struggles, you seem to touch on these subjects, but just in a very subtle and very respectful way, by honoring all the strengths and the beautifulness of the powerful of the women. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but just
Well,
I just want to say
thank you
thank
for
you.
recognizing that, because we grew up in a dictatorship where the dictator had droit de seigneur. He could sleep with any woman. You couldn't even marry little girl. He could have it, or your family could be wiped out. So it was very much a time where to be in a woman's body was dangerous. I mean, that time still goes on, but it was a macho culture. But I didn't experience that growing up, really, because the men would all leave to go to work in the day, and I was surrounded by a matriarchy. The abuela, the tía, the madrina, la cocinera. It was a woman-centered, and what I saw was powerful women who ran my world. And I always was so grateful that I was not going to be, that I wasn't a boy, and I wasn't going to grow up and have to leave this sisterhood. So it's interesting, even though it was a macho and a dangerous culture for females, that wasn't my experience. So that's part of the power that I think comes across in some of my women characters, that they're no masa de pan. But on the other hand, we see, once you get to her, you see someone who has become a victim of the patriarchy, and bienvenida. I think of her as a romantic casualty of the dictatorship. She didn't die heroically like a freedom fighter, like the Mirabal sisters, but she is a kind of casualty, and not the powerful Mirabal sisters who stood up to it. And those were the women I knew. They ruled the world. Because it was entre familia. So there's a ñapa. There's a ñapa.
Okay, the last one.
The ñapa.
La ñapa.
No.
I teach students that are bilingual, and we encourage them to maintain them.
Gracias. I wish we had had you.
And my curiosity is, how
Well, you know, the great thing is that now no one is circling Aunt Claire, Tia Clara, and transforming, giving her green papers so she can be on paper, and calling her Aunt Claire. You know, people are sensitive to that. And more Spanglish. Because people say you're Spanish and you're English. Where, you know, how do you decide what gets, that doesn't happen in my head. You know, it's like the waves in the shore, they come and recede, the Spanish, the English. And then people try to get you, and they say, well, what are you dreaming? And I said, what do I dream in? If Papi comes in the dream, he speaks to me in Spanish. If the chair of my department, back then, came in, he speaks to me in English. And it's just, you know, so part of it is as you write, since I am writing for English, and I don't want any of my readers that are monolingual to feel left out. Because what I love about story is that it's the big table for all, you know. But I try to make it so that by the time they're reading into my book, they know Spanish. They know it by context. And there's, I think readers feel when they can figure something out, it empowers them. You don't just have a colonized reader where everything is, you know, poured on them. They're interacting. And so I try to make it that the reader, even if monolingual, will know by context. And I read Japanese American authors, Chinese American authors. I read across, you know, the different multiculturalisms. And I don't know those languages, but it's not even the specific words, but we were talking about this, even the syntax, how they put English together is Dominicanized. You know, we hear it different. Our sentences are different because we have, you know, root system also in another language. And I think it's, you know, it's not a decision. And sometimes you have a writer, a character say something and you realize that word in English just doesn't do it. For instance, I have a word that I use to talk about why I end up writing a story. And I say, it's like a pebble in my shoe. But in Spanish, I have the perfect word for it, una inquietud. How do you get that across? It's not a worry. It's not a disquiet. There's something about inquietud that gets to me all the permutations of what's going on. So sometimes a character just needs that word. You know, ñapa, how do I say that? Give me my what? Is there even an English word?
A little extra?
Extra?
Like
No, but
in English?
Una ñapa. Huh? A baker's dozen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a
There's
baker's
the
dozen,
translator.
right? Una ñapa. Una ñapa. Yeah. So it's just a question of characters and context. Yeah.
I think that's it.
Colorín
Colorado.
colorado,
Este
cuento se ha acabado. Thank you.